And we're live. It is Monday, December 1st, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. The sun is shining. The birds are chirping. It's going to be a great frickin' day, and you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a goddamn revolution in morning television. One of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that sometimes I forego the monologue to give us more time with our guest who has to bolt in around 30 or 40 minutes, and we want to keep the conversation as available as possible for him. And another one of the revolutionary features is that sometimes um, my my co-founders of Lawfare go off and start their own blogs, and they write things that really we should be publishing on Lawfare on said blogs, and I call them up anyway and say, hey, that was a really good piece. Come on the show and let's talk about it. And that, folks, is what happened today. Jack Goldsmith is, of course, professor at Harvard Law School, one of my closest friends, co-founder of Lawfare, and abandoned us for the executive functions site, along with the no less perfidious Bob Bauer. I'm joking. And
I just want to say, isn't Dog Shirt Daily a blog that abandoned lawfare?
uh, no, because Dog Shirt Daily does things that Lawfare doesn't do,
Oh, okay.
like frivolity and inanity. But it's also
I was joking also.
yeah, so was I. Um, anyway, Jack had a fascinating piece on Friday or Saturday, I'm not sure which it
Friday,
was,
Friday night. Friday night.
um, in response to this Washington Post piece that sounded, uh, uh, like a crazed leftist, and uh, could have been written by Michael Ratner or, the ACLU or something. And so I thought, in the great harmonic convergence of all sane people, we should talk about it. Um, Jack, first give us a little overview of the Washington Post article that you were responding to, and then give us a little overview of what you argued.
Sure. The Post argued on Friday, I believe they had a story on Friday that said that with respect to a strike ordered in one of these alleged Venezuelan drug carrying boats in September, I believe it was September 2nd, that Hegseth had issued an order. I don't remember the exact words. Maybe you have it in front of you. An order that said, in effect,
It was kill them all.
kill them all. Yeah. So he was quoted as saying, kill them all. Then apparently the strike took place, and apparently there were two survivors who were clinging to the wreckage. At which point, the then head of JSOC, I can't remember his first name, his last name is Bradley, apparently ordered a second strike to kill the two men who were clinging to the wreckage. It's not clear from the story whether Hegseth was in the loop for the second strike. I think that might be important for various reasons. It seems like my best read of the story is that Bradley, the commander in charge, ordered the second strike thinking he was complying with the orders of Hegseth. That was at least the way the story portrayed it. So that was what I was responding to the legality of killing these two survivors. I started the piece in ways that I don't think were terribly leftist by indulging the possibility that the president might actually, under these crazy OLC precedents to which I contributed, might have the Article 2 authority to be engaging in these strikes. I said that I was much more doubtful about the apparent claim that these boat strikes constitute an armed conflict with this non-state actor group, whatever it is. I'm very doubtful about that, but it's imaginable. You can imagine an argument that we're in an armed conflict with these folks, even though I think it's probably clearly wrong and probably rests on a finding that the president made in bad faith. But even accepting that we're in a conflict with these groups, I said that it was basically there's no argument for there's no conceivable lawful argument for the legality of killing the two survivors, and it was clear they were clearly out of combat. It's clearly a war crime under the DoD Law of War Manual and long-standing international law in an armed conflict, including a non-international armed conflict, to target and kill people who are out of combat, which these two clearly were. In fact, the DoD manual, and I'll stop here, uses over and over the example of shipwrecked people as the primary example for people who are out of combat and can't be targeted. And indeed, I believe that the manual uses that as an example of a clearly unlawful order that can't be complied with to kill people who are shipwrecked and out of the battle. So that was basically what I argued on Friday night.
All right, so let's talk about the contours of this. It seems like the administration's response has been to deny that this order was given rather than to try to defend it. Trump says that Hegseth says he never said kill everybody. Um, on the other hand, and this strikes me as an encouraging sign, there does seem to be bipartisan desire in the Senate to um, conduct oversight here. Roger Wicker, the Republican Armed Services chair, has promised vigorous oversight. So it seems like there's I don't want to ever say there's, you know, something encouraging going on, because that way leads to bitter disappointment always. But it seems like if the Republican Armed Services Committee is promising oversight and the president is denying that the thing happened, it seems like at least we are not in a world where somebody other than Pete Hegseth is saying, damn straight we did it. Um, hell yeah. How do you read the administration's response?
So I haven't studied it closely. Hegseth has tweeted a few things that I view as basically stiff-arming everyone and saying, thumping his chest as I put it in my piece and saying, this is a valid operation and we're going to keep killing these narco-terrorists. I view that as him sending a signal that he has the back of the people who below him who engaged in this strike and that he's fully on board. And of course, he's trying to blame the Post for false reporting, but no one, I mean, they haven't yet. Well, I guess he's denied that through Trump, that he said those words. Trump said he didn't say those words. So, but I will also say I have a little bit of a different reaction. Trump said during the gaggle yesterday, I think it was, that he wouldn't have ordered the second strike. That threw somebody under the bus, whether it's Hegseth or Bradley or someone. That was a remarkable thing for the president to say and kind of a hard thing to walk back. I am also encouraged by the bipartisan concern, a pretty strong bipartisan concern on the armed services committees. I don't think, even with the Iran strike that we've seen, maybe with the Iran strike, we've seen this level of concern. I suspect that this is just a suspicion that the committee was briefed on this event and the briefing was not fully candid. That's my sense, that they were telling a different story of what happened from the one told in the Post. And I suspect, just a suspicion that they weren't fully briefed. The other thing you didn't mention, Ben, that I think is hugely important and actually counts as encouraging in the Trump administration 2.0, the Post reported and others have reported that they changed the protocols and the policy after this strike to require survivors of these strikes to be picked up and returned to their countries, suggesting that even in a DOD that they've tried to denudor of objective legal advice, they realized they couldn't keep doing this, and that the policy, we can discuss this maybe secondarily, the policy of targeting these people and then picking up survivors and returning them home rather than detaining them or trying them militarily is a crazy thing. But it does suggest that that there was massive concern inside DOD, and they changed this policy. So all of those things count as, I think, small rays of light and hope in Trump 2.0.
All right, so let's talk about, first of all, the big dark cloud, and secondly, the rays of light. Um, I am mystified about how layers and layers and layers of DoD review, which, goes into operational planning, don't flag this as a serious problem prospectively. You've been at DODGC. Including in a time where there was, serious controversy about what DoD was doing in certain areas. Um, how does this get through? I mean, this is, as you point out in your piece, as clear as any point in the law of war is. It's an old enough principle to be expressed in French, not in, right? Like, it's not, this isn't subtle.
Right.
Um, how
That's
does
good.
nobody say to Bradley, you can't do this, and nobody say to Hegseth, you can't order this?
I don't know. I have to say it's a mystery. There's still a lot we don't know. But in normal times, as you say, these things are massively planned out. The rules of engagement are massively gone over. This is not the first time that they've engaged in boat strikes during conflict where there might be survivors. This is not a close call about what the rules are. It is very hard for me to imagine. And by the way, The Intercept, which reported this story first back in September, but it didn't get notice. The Intercept said that
Well, the Intercept reported that it was a double tap strike and that there was a follow up. I don't think it reported that Hegseth ordered that
no,
everybody be killed.
no. I was going to say what they did report was that the second strike came very quickly after the first. And if it came very quickly after the first, after perceiving that there were still people alive, then it is almost inconceivable for me to understand how Bradley could have ordered that. He would have known that that would not have been disallowed. Everyone around him would have known, excuse me, that would not have been allowed. Everyone around him would have known that. It should have been clear in the rules of engagement. Um, maybe they thought that the Hegseth order constituted a change in policy. That I think that sounds like, again, we're really speculating here. That the Post story is pretty spare. It sounds like that the Hegseth order was interpreted as a take no prisoners order, and the Hegseth order itself is a little ambiguous. If those words were the ones he uttered, he could have just been saying make it a lethal strike, as opposed. I mean, that could have been the intent of his words, in which case it wouldn't have been as problematic. But I don't know. I mean, this is so clearly not allowed, and so clearly known to not be allowed that it's very hard for me to understand how, in the JSOC chain of command, this happened.
All right, so one possibility is that it didn't happen and that the Post is wrong, not necessarily in the specifics of the reporting, but in the meaning of the reporting, and that what Hegseth actually said, or what Bradley understood, was take out the boat, kill whoever you have to kill, right? There's a subtle difference between that and an order to take no prisoners, but it does seem to me to be a significant difference.
Very important distinction. Think about the Bin Laden raid. Yes. I mean, it's a very important distinction to say you can lawfully and lethally target a military objective, as they're called. And but once that military objective is out of combat, you can no longer do it. That's a subtle distinction. It can be, and there are often judgment calls, no doubt.
All right, so the Post story is reported, and this, for those who've never read my story, my essay some years ago about how to read investigative stories. The rules for DOD are a little bit different from the rules for the Justice Department because there's no grand jury, but it is a show of flex when you say this is based on 7 sources. Um, and that's the Post saying to Hegseth, don't fuck with us on this. If Roger Wicker holds hearings, there are a lot of people who are going to testify that you said this. But let's consider the possibility that he didn't say it. Um, uh, would that be then on Bradley, that second strike? Or does Bradley get to say, wait a minute, he gave me an order that I reasonably interpreted that way? How far down the line can Hegseth push accountability for this?
So I think, again, we're taking the Post's facts as true, and I don't know what the facts are. I mean, Ellen Nakashima is a very credible reporter, and I don't know who the other reporter was, but she was one of the 2 reporters on this story, and she's a very credible reporter, and this was clearly a story long in the making, and the Post seems fairly confident about it. We'll see. I think that even if, I tried to make this clear earlier, even if Hegseth issued the order to take no quarter, let's just imagine that he issued an order and that it had the import of kill everyone, including doing whatever it takes to do it. That's right, Alex Horton. That Bradley has no defense. This is such a clearly illegal order that I have a hard time seeing, if the facts of the second strike as reported are accurate, how it could have been possibly lawful, even if Hegseth himself issued an order to take no quarter. So I don't see if the facts are right, what Bradley's argument is. There was an argument, the argument in the Post that was floated and attributed to Bradley was, well, we killed the other 2 because, and I'm paraphrasing, we killed the other 2 because they might have they theoretically could have called in for support and rescue. But as I explained in my piece, that's just simply not the test. They would have had to have been acting in self-defense, flashing arms, and seeking to flee for this possibly not to be out of combat when they were shipwrecked like that. So it sounds like, again, my reading of the Post story is that an error took place in JSOC at the time of the second shot, if the facts are right. As for Hegseth's responsibility, who knows what the order was, what the context of the order was. But I think that Bradley is the one whose action seems to be very hard to justify here.
John Hawkinson, you have a question.
Yeah, good morning. 2 quick questions. One, is decision making in drone strikes maybe just too fast for the processes that normally operate around these kinds of military actions? And secondly, do we really understand what happened to JAGs and what's the actual role of legal advice here? Thanks.
Ben, do you want to take the second question? But I'll just answer the first. I'll give a quick answer to both, and then Ben can fill it out. Yes, these things happen quickly, but this is why the rules of engagement are so detailed and gone over in such detail, and why these things are trained, and why they're so important. And also, the need for speed here is much, much less severe when you're attacking people who are basically unarmed and pose no threat. So I don't think the need for speed can be a defense for anyone. Secondly, I have not followed in detail. Maybe Ben has. I know at the beginning of the administration that the senior JAGs in the DOD were fired. And that obviously sends a message to all military lawyers in the DOD. I don't know with whom they were replaced. I don't know what the state of the JAG chain of command is. I don't know what the state of military law lawyering is in the DOD. I can tell you, in my experience, it's always been extremely serious and robust, and the lawyers have had a very large role in strikes like this. They're sitting there right there with the commander in the training and in the execution, in my experience. But I don't know what the state of the lawyers is. Ben, do you?
I don't. I mean, I know there is a climate of fear at the service academies, including in the legal departments of the service academies. I know that, uh, you know, there is, it is not a good climate in which to be a military lawyer. I know that Hegseth is very publicly sending all the wrong messages. And, when you dwell upon themes like lethality and you use epithets to refer to JAGs, uh, you do send a message. How much that message has penetrated down to the operational level that you do not raise a legal question about a strike that is plainly unlawful, I don't know. And I think, you know, Wicker and Jack Reed and company, if they want to really do a public service, can do an after action analysis of how this strike came to be and came to be approved and who thought they knew what about the law of armed conflict. But um, I don't think we can say yet that the degradation of the JAG Corps is a major causal thing here, but I do think it's a very important hypothesis, just as the replacement of professional prosecutors with Lindsay Halligan's. There we know that it's a causal thing because we see the indictments, right? We see the work product. Here, you don't get to see the work product, but you do get to see the fruits of the work product, and you're allowed to make reasonable inferences from that and ask questions. But I don't think we should get ahead of the answers to those questions.
Can I say
One
something here? Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah. I just one quick note on the speed issue with respect to drone strikes. I don't think that's remotely an excuse. The operator of the drone controls the pace of the drone strikes. This is a situation in which literally all the power is in one side's hands. You have no operational pressure. You can circle a drone for as long as you want. That's called loiter time in the business. And you can pause it for legality review and just sit there and loiter over the thing until you know it's legal. I think that the pacing argument goes in exactly the opposite direction here. Sorry, Jack, over to you.
If I could just mention one more causal vector that may have, and it's worth exploring and may have explanatory power here. Hegseth has been touting the idea of returning the, what does he call it, the warrior mentality or the warrior ethic.
Yes, the ethos.
Warrior
Because he gets to use a Greek word.
That's right, the warrior ethos to the Defense Department. And I've seen snippets of his book where he makes fun of the Geneva Conventions, and I think there's been a suggestion, I haven't studied this fully, in some of his discussions about this, that DOD has become too timid, they've been too politically correct in their use of force. There's been a suggestion that they've been too compliant with the laws of war. He's definitely been sending that message. I suspect he's been sending that message with hiring and firing. And I suspect he's been sending that, again, suspicion, these are inferences from what we know, that that's a message he's been pushing inside the building. And so the first thing I would say is that can have an impact. That can have an impact on, the DoD culture is a very firm culture, but it can have an impact on the culture. It can have an impact on individuals in the chain of command who are maybe carefully selected. And it really, in my experience, it goes so against the way the uniformed military that I know and have known for the 20 years I've been kind of paying attention to DoD, the way they see it. I mean, they see the laws of war as empowering, and as basically compliance with the laws of war as giving justification for them to kill in an honorable way. And So this strike is the least conceivable honorable strike. You're striking someone who's been shipwrecked, who's clinging to their lives. Again, if the facts of the post are true. And it's just a terrible context to say this is what the warrior ethos requires. It goes completely against the warrior ethos.
So I completely agree with that. Unless the warrior ethos is what we all kind of suspect Hexeth really means by it, which is a sort of macho brutalization thing. Um, but all right, two more issues before you have to jump off, and I want to be respectful of your time. The first is normally the mechanism of accountability here would be an investigation during the Bush administration. You know, when Abu Ghraib happened, there were serious internal DoD investigations. That's actually how Abu Ghraib came out. And then there were subsequent investigations that were extremely politically damaging to the administration. I don't see anything like that happening here. Um, First of all, am I wrong to be that pessimistic about the administration's capacity to investigate this or desire to investigate this? And secondly, what do you see as the mechanism of accountability in the absence of that?
I agree with you. It would be shocking given what we've learned in the first 10 or 11 months of the Trump administration 2.0 if there were a robust internal investigation of this inside the executive branch, either in DOD through any of a number of mechanisms it might be. It could be a lawyer's investigation. It could be an inspector general investigation. It could be a specially constituted investigation, or in DOJ. I just think I would be shocked if there were such an investigation, given the kind of loyalty norms that dominate, and given it would just be so politically damaging and cause such divisiveness. And divisiveness, I imagine that what's going on is there's serious divisiveness right now between the civilians and the uniformed persons. In the guise of Hegseth versus the uniformed persons, and that's going to be exacerbated here. So I just don't see an internal investigation happening. I would be surprised. The Armed Services Committees could have a very serious investigation, and they've promised one. And when they decide they want something to happen, the Armed Services Committees have a lot of power over DOD. I think this week they're going to announce the revised National Defense Authorization Act. This is vitally important for DOD's operations. They have, if they want, lots of control over appropriations. The Armed Services Committees could, on penalty of various types of pain to DOD, conduct a serious investigation. That's the way that I see accountability happening, if at all, at least during this administration.
All right, next issue. One reason I expect, and you allude to this in your piece, that Hegseth is able to make these outrageous tweets is that he expects a pardon to the extent he has any exposure. And Trump has done, even this past week, he's contemplating publicly pardon for the former Honduran president. I mean, he gives signals that he's prepared to do this. I know that mug. Um, that mug is a field cup from the rule of law field force in Afghanistan.
No, it's not, but it looks just like one.
Uh, which one is it?
It's a Yeti mug.
Oh, okay. It
It
looks
looks just like the Rule of Law Field Force mug. I agree.
It does look like the field force mug. Um, do you expect essentially all criminal process here to be mooted out as a result of the pardon power, either prospectively or retrospectively?
I do. I imagine that if it hasn't already happened, it will. That there is some person in the White House who's keeping a list of all of the things that are at the edges or inside criminal action throughout the administration. And I expect that near the end of this administration, we're going to see pardons on a scale, preemptive pardons on a scale that we've never seen, except maybe, the Vietnam pardons or something like that. But and so I do expect that the president will very broadly pardon everyone involved here. There's no basis for this in any reporting. There is a basis in this in Trump has used the pardon power to protect his own and to protect friends and to reward those who can help him. And I think it's pretty clear that part of this intense loyalty norm that the administration has developed this time, unprecedented, is an implicit, if not express, understanding that the president has people's backs and will pardon them. And so I do expect blanket pardons for everyone involved here. And I expect there will be a list developed. I expect people will want to be on the list. And I think this is just one of several contexts where that will happen. And I suspect it'll happen near the end of his term.
All right, so one last issue. If we're removing the possibility of an internal investigation of any integrity, and we're saying that a retroactive investigation later will not have the capacity for criminal sanction against Hegseth or against anybody else, that puts an enormous amount of weight on whatever Roger Wicker is going to do. And so, if you were advising Wicker here, there are a lot of possible strategic objectives to a congressional investigation. One is change policy, one is, get the crazy guy out of office, right? I mean, you can't immunize an impeachment. Um, you can't pardon an impeachment. What is the strategic objective that Wicker should be thinking about right now?
I'm more interested in hearing what you have to say about this. You have more wisdom on these issues than I do, so I'll start off. I think the first order of business is to expose what happened. I think it's vital that the breakdowns in normal process be that we have a full accounting of what happened in terms of the facts, that there be no possibility of hiding or lying about the facts. I think that that alone will be extremely damaging and consequential in terms of how far we've seen departures from the normal DoD norms, how much antagonism and disrespect for Hegseth there is, or maybe slightly differently put, how incompetent he is to be running the Department of Defense. So I think the very first order of business is to totally flesh out the facts. And then the second order of business, see where do the politics take us from there? Does this mean that there are long knives out for Hegseth? I imagine both in DoD and on the Armed Services Committees. So I think a lot of this could be a large accountability measure. Could be his removal. I have no idea if that's feasible. I'm talking about by firing or resignation. Impeachment is a possibility. I think that's a long shot because it takes 2/3 of the senators. But if the facts are bad enough, it's a possibility, and I'm sure that there would be a resignation or a firing before it reached that point. Beyond that, I mean, I think of accountability much more broadly than criminal sanctions or civil sanctions. I think about it in terms of finding out what the facts are. That's important form of accountability, letting the politics operate on those facts to the extent that there can be, shaming, i.e., this is a bad thing and we can't let it happen again. That should be fleshed out. We should know. It would be very interesting to know why there was this protocol change after September 2nd. There's probably a lot of evidence there about people knowing this is wrong, saying it was wrong. I'm sure there's a lot to learn there. So my suggestion, but I'm interested in what you have to say, is just focus hard in the first instance as soon as possible on finding out the truth of what's happened here. And you can go broader. You can go just this episode, but also what messages about compliance with the law have been being sent, what structure is put up within DoD to ensure that it complies with the law. These are all things I would want to know.
Yeah, so I certainly agree with, the first priority is establishing the facts. I would also, during the Abu Ghraib stuff, as you will remember, there was a sense in which, people used Abu Ghraib, which was an abuse that was not compliant with the rules, as a way to zoom out to figure out what new stuff the rules were authorizing. And remember, I forget his name, general sent to Abu Ghraib to Iraq to Gitmoize detentions in Iraq, and there was a somewhat tendentious, but also quite legitimate effort to connect Abu Ghraib to what actual policy was. And you know, uh, and nobody contended that the Abu Ghraib abuses were compliant with the rules, but they really did use that as a way to explore the rules. And I think there's that sort of, frankly, unfairness is very legitimate. And this is not if you're removing criminal process here, then you're not bound by the rules of criminal process, right? And Congress is sort of allowed to explore anything they want. I think when you talk about the facts, the where were the JAGs? The what did you do to the JAG Corps, right? You want to paint a big picture here, and use this as the thin edge of a wedge to examine what's going on in DoD.
Yep.
And then I also think you want to use it to ask the question, should we be blowing up boats in the Caribbean? And that's a question about which Congress has been mostly silent, um, and lamentably so, because as you point out, and as Janine pointed out on this show, there are arguments you can make that the underlying policy is lawful, or at least not wildly
Not crazy.
not wildly inconsistent with prior art. Um, there is, I think, no good policy argument that you can make for the idea that this is a good idea, given that we have a Coast Guard, given that we have, lots of other ways uh, to interdict drugs coming into the United States. And I do think, some zoom out to the question of, why are we blowing up boats unnecessarily in the Caribbean and killing people without any kind of process, and also, um, what are we staging for? We also seem to be getting ready for some kind of on land operation, if you believe the president. And so I guess strategically, I would say the Armed Services Committee should understand that this is a narrow bore question. Is it okay? Did it really happen? And is it okay to kill people who are hors de combat in the Caribbean Sea? Answer no. Did it really happen? Let's find out. Um, but the layers at which, once you start zooming out that, you get into really important other questions is significant.
Yeah. I mean, look, absolutely. This is a unilateral presidential policy. It is legally very controversial. It is very controversial as a policy matter. The president is using force without congressional authorization. Congress should, I completely agree, zoom out. They should get the facts of this event, but use that to zoom out and examine this policy. Let's see if the administration can defend it. They have a deterrence argument. They've got legal arguments. But this is exactly the way separation of powers is normally supposed to work. We're talking about it as some exotic thing. But this is exactly what's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen in public. The administration has been using classifications as a way to hide this stuff. Not necessary for so much of this stuff. Completely agree that the whole policy should be examined. And if I could say one last thing, and you alluded to this, but I want to underscore it. One really wants to know why did Hegseth fire the JAGs as one of his first acts? What was his aim there? And how did he follow up on that in terms of messaging to lawyers in the administration and in the DoD? And how did the lawyers respond? I think this is a hugely fruitful avenue for questioning and for fact finding. So but I completely agree with what you said about zooming out and examining this policy. And the administration should be able to defend it.
And do you have what is your confidence level that Wicker and company are going to actually do this rather than have a sort of pro forma hearing about the incident narrowly?
Medium low.
Jack, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Ben.
Please, when you hit leave it open, leave the window open until it's fully uploaded. And have a great day. And thanks for joining us
Click the
today.
leave button and then wait for it to upload.
Yep.
All right. Take care. Have a great day.
Folks, Jack has put a lot on the table. If you have thoughts on any of it, feel free to pop up on screen. We've got about 19 minutes left. And if you have questions about any of the issues that he raises, I am happy to try to answer them. If you have thoughts, I want to hear them. John is waiting for someone else to go first, but I think he shouldn't. So John, join us. Yeah, there you go.
Hey, Ben. Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up on the concern I raised about the speed of drone strikes. And it was not so much what you addressed, which was, sure, they can wait. The concern was that the the nature of drones is such that there is not a requirement to wait. There isn't the same time that you would have to order forces on the ground or at sea to go do things. And so I worry that systems that aren't explicitly designed to enforce pauses mean that things have the ability to happen so fast that it's hard to intervene, and it's hard even to stop and think about the consequences of your actions even if you are, very attuned to the laws of war.
Okay, so number one, that is true of a rifle too, right?
But not so much the
You-
second shot.
I'm
I
sorry.
mean, I said
I mean,
not
you
so much
fire a
the second
first
shot.
shot, you have moments to decide whether to fire a second shot, right? And we don't forgive war crimes committed with a rifle because boy, that second shot is so tempting in real time. Um, we say the weapon is powerful, and that conveys an additional obligation in terms of how you use it. Secondly, this is what rules of engagement are for. They are specifically so that you think about some of this stuff in advance and you decide what are literally the rules that you go through before you, in this case, engage a second time. And I can't imagine that the rules of engagement here said, and if there are people holding on to the boat, the remains of the boat, uh, hit them again, right?
Right.
And so the question of how this complies with the normal rules that you know it's not like DOD is lacking in capacity to think about that exact question. Um, and, you have different weapon systems convey different senses of how you deal with that. And then there are these underlying principles. You're just not allowed to kill the wounded. And
Right.
it doesn't matter if the weapon system you're using makes it really tempting.
Well, I,
Um,
I guess it would help me to understand, Ben, and I should be clear, I definitely have no expertise on this other than sort of general awareness of how software works. But it would help me to understand how, in a prior administration, a drone strike goes through this rules of engagement based process. And, are we talking about two guys standing in a control center, one with a finger on one button? Are we talking about, a checklist that somebody's reviewing? Are we talking about computers that make, recommendations for decisions but don't actually, how does it work mechanically?
Yeah, so my knowledge of this is going to be a little bit limited in time, because the period in which I was following drone strikes carefully was really the mid and late Obama administration. Um, uh, and there may have been significant changes in the art, although that was the period in which we were doing a shitload of them. So, look, a few things. One is that there are multiple different kinds of drone strikes. There's the kind where you think of it as a very bespoke kind of drone strike, right? You have an individual target. You're targeting John Hawkinson. You're watching a compound very closely from the sky, hopefully with some ground intelligence too. Um, and your target is him, not the compound or not, some weapon that's on the compound. That's one extreme. In that case, the relevant question will be, did you get him? Um, or do you think you missed, in which case you might hit the target again? The second type, the other extreme, is it's a combat situation, right? Drones are there in support. They're just like any other aircraft in support of troops doing things. Um, or they're softening up a target for a ground strike, right? But it's a combat situation, and the target is not necessarily an individual, um, but it's just like you're using it like a plane, only it's a plane that can sit there and watch. In that situation, it might be much more fluid, right? Because have you achieved the objective? But in all situations that I'm aware of, there is an assessment. And by the way, double tap strikes, which, have a really bad rep, they do have a place in the world, right? You you hit a target. Maybe you're trying to destroy as many, trying to kill as many, armed guys who are doing bad things as possible. You kill a bunch of them, and then a whole bunch more come to do rescue work or evacuations, but they're combatants, right? And you hit that. I am not per se opposed to that, um, although often they are bad. Um, I You have to know what you're doing. Um, and you have to be targeting people who were actually combatants. Um, and the nature of the weapon system doesn't change that obligation at all.
To be clear, I'm certainly not offering any of this as justification. I'm more offering it as concern about system design.
No,
That
no, I completely understand the concern. My answer as an enraged lefty, of which I am not, is that the burden is on the side that's using the weapon system to design systems appropriate to that weapon system. Andrew Steele, soulless attorney.
Yes,
What
Ben,
is
good
on your
morning.
soulless attorney mind this morning?
Well, my dog was just assaulting me. I'm not sure if you saw it, but this is the other dog shirt that she was probably trying to get at.
Excellent.
Okay, so one kind of small factual question, then one kind of comment on this topic, and then one bigger question for you, I guess. And are we sure that all of the strikes, I don't know how many there've been, there's like 80 something deaths, but maybe it's 20 strikes, have
20-ish.
have all of the strikes been drones, or have some of them been helicopters, or perhaps aircraft?
So I don't think we know. And I think some of them could be ground based, right? I mean, some of them could be Tomahawk tactical Tomahawks.
Hmm.
Some of them could be drones. Um, I don't think we know. The Washington Post story said something about a missile roaring off of the coast of Trinidad. Now, does that mean that we were firing a land-based, land-to-surface missile from Trinidad? I didn't know we had, or does it mean that we had a naval
A
vessel
gunship,
stationed off
says
of
Fred.
Trinidad?
Perhaps, according to the New York Times, an AC-130 gunship is one option.
Right. So there's a lot of possibilities. People are saying drones, because that's what our imagination goes to these days. But it's not clear to me that all of these strikes are drone strikes.
Yep. No, I agree. And I do think, it's part of this larger kind of conversation, and it's obviously lethality is the goal. I think, and just the comment is, we found sort of an interesting exception to the golden shield concept that we had talked about, and then Professor Goldsmith had posted a pretty well thought out piece about reliance on an OLC opinion basically allows the military to conduct strikes irrespective of whether they're legal. Um, so this is just a step too far in terms of illegality. I think is pretty obvious. And so the next question, and it's something that maybe we had talked about briefly on Tuesday, or you had brought up, is like the broader question of accountability and like what your thoughts have been. And I feel like you're probably one of the best people to ask about the prudence of impeachment of some of these officers, either in the DOD, Hegseth himself, bringing it to Pam Bondi, Lindsay Halligan. I've been trying to think about like conspiracy to deprive James and Letitia James and James Comey of their civil rights as an actual like impeachable offense. I think that's difficult to conceive of if they're actually the prosecutors. I don't know if that's some sort of exception to that. But yeah, I'm just wondering, is that something that George Conway posted on Twitter that he was going to chat with Joyce Vance about basically drawing up articles? So yeah, is that something that you think is prudent? And John made a really good point in the chat that if it fails, then you look kind of foolish. Like I think the Republican Congress looked a bit foolish with the Mayorkas impeachment, even though they don't think so.
Right. So, number one, the Mayorkas impeachment is a real risk. Now, Ali Mayorkas did not commit an impeachable offense. And um and I think the foolishness the foolishness there was twofold. One was in using the impeachment process as a form of issuing a press release. I think you should only use the impeachment process if you actually want to have a trial. Um, and that raises the question of who controls the Senate.
J.D.
Because,
Vance and
well, right.
Scott
So,
Grassley and such.
like, assume you had a House majority now,
Yep.
but you're sending the thing to John Thune-controlled Senate.
He's
I
running
think
out of
there's
patience with a lot of this, and there's a lot of senators that are. It's
right,
not immediately obvious that they're 17, but I think there
right.
are at least some.
Don't get to the question of whether you can get a conviction
Yep.
yet. Get to the question only of could you even have a trial? Right now, the answer is no. And so I think any talk of impeachment is premature.
For any officer, you think it's just a non-starter.
Yes. I don't because of that problem. Now, is it different if you control if enough senators are enough concerned to actually do something? Yeah, I think then it's different. Then you have a question of what the value of the trial is. Also, could you get him out of office by impeaching him, not because you would actually impeach him, but because he would resign or be fired or, and I think those questions become very valuable. I will say that the place where I think impeachment could be very valuable is after a set of pardons, doing exactly what Democrats in the House did in January 6th, which is Trump is out of office, impeach him anyway because of the value of disqualification. And so, but to me, it's really hinges on a very tangible question, which is what is the value that you're getting out of the impeachment? Is it just that you issue a press release saying, 218 members of the House say fuck you? Then no, I don't think that's useful. If, on the other hand, the value is that you may force Republicans to say this kind of impeachment is not a problem. This kind of
action.
behavior is not a problem. If you might be able to disqualify him from office, or if because he's pardoned, you have no other way to label the conduct as completely unacceptable, then I think it's a different picture. So what I would say is it should never be your first step. I completely agree with Jack that you want to get
a record.
The first step is a record.
For sure.
And the record, by the way, includes what he has to say about it.
His Twitter post is like the worst non-denial. It's just so empty of any actual statement.
Although it's not under oath.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Get him in front of the Armed Service Committee. Get him to say, get those 7 people who talked to the Washington Post, get every single one of them under oath. We can reconstruct what the chain of command was if you're the Armed Services Committee. If the Washington Post can do it, the Armed Services Committee can do it. Mm-hmm. There are clearly whistleblowers.
Yes.
Get them all on the record under oath. Then we'll talk about what the right remedies are.
Yep.
And by the way, force Trump to pardon him. Like, I think that pardon would be very unpopular.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. Should somebody who needs a pardon be Secretary of Defense? Right? These are questions that right now are hypothetical, but let's let them bubble up. And I think those are really important things to let develop.
Yeah, the political, the GOP was up in arms about these like prospective pardons from Biden out the door that they're now trying to say were signed by AutoPen, which is just ridiculous. But yeah, I'm curious about these 7 unnamed sources, and like just briefly, journalistically, that's normal. You think, right? That would be at this stage, and I think that the public is demanding some evidence, or I think we should at least, or some, on the record statements.
So first of all, I don't know anything about who the Post sources are, but you do something like this, there are a lot of people who know. And some of them, you get a team of good reporters, and this is 2 good reporters working the issue over time, and people who are uncomfortable may have something to say about it. And by the way, it may or may not be lawful for them to talk to the Washington Post, depending on the classification status of the information. But it's certainly lawful for them to talk to the Armed Services Committee in the appropriate circumstance. And by the way, the Armed Services Committee can force people to talk to them. And so I think there's every reason to think that the Armed Services Committee could, if it wants to, get to ground truth. And that raises the question of whether it wants to.
Yep.
Folks, we got to leave it there. It is, I have an important announcement, which is I have to go to a different time zone on Wednesday, so there will not be a show on Wednesday. And Dogshirt Daily will be on Pacific time on Thursday and Friday. That is, we will have no show on Wednesday, and we will be at 8 a.m. Pacific time, i.e. 11 a.m. Monday 11 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday and Friday. We will be back to our normal schedule next Monday. But that leaves tomorrow when we will be here at the normal time. I don't know who the hosts are going to be. I don't know who the guests are going to be, but you'll be there. I'll be there. It'll be a blast, and we will see you then.